We gotta convince each family that we're on their side, and then we rob them both. Before they figure out it was us that done it, and not the other lot, we'll be long gone. Think of it as payback for my daddy.
Clemens Point, Chapter 3 in Red Dead Redemption 2, the chapter that is praised for having one of, if not the most iconic mission in the entire game. A chapter that sees the gang's true scope of versatility by playing two families simultaneously in the hopes of discovering the mountain of gold one of, if not both, families were sitting on. A chapter that is important in way too many ways to highlight. From Sadie rising out of her depression, Arthur working closely with Hosea actually taking the reins, giving us insight into how he used to control his own operations within the gang back in his prime. Then we have the conclusion of Strauss's death on Thomas Downs, the first time the gang suffered a casualty since Blackwater via the death of Sean, and so much more. But today I wanted to highlight two other moments that peeks through, if only for a moment. They're very subtle, with one of them maybe being a bit of a stretch and venturing into theory territory, while the other is quite blatant if you isolate the gang's operations and look at it from a very direct perspective. Both of which could be considered foreshadowing during Clemens Point that become key components in the story of Red Dead Redemption 2's conclusion, and how everything from Dutch's leadership to Arthur's changing loyalty eventually plays out. Now the first of these two is Arthur's cough. There's some key parts during the chapter of Shady Belle where his cough becomes much more prominent or consistent, where it's very difficult for him to clear out his throat or his lungs. And while the beginning of his prominent cough is a point of conjecture, I think the start of his cough is the beginning of Clemens Point, which is poetic in its own way because it's the same chapter that he goes back to reclaim the debt from the Downs family. It's very small, but at the beginning of A New South, the first mission in Clemens Point, as he's approaching Dutch, who's on the banks of the lake overlooking the water, every time Dutch asks him how he's doing, it always begins with him sluggishly clearing his throat and just saying he's fine.
How you doing, old friend?
Fine.
It seems like an innocuous cough, but when you take into consideration the climate of the South, which Dutch quickly refers to as thick and soupy, and of course the circumstances as to how they found themselves in the South. They're hot off the heels of initiating a bloodbath in the town of Valentine, thanks to Leviticus Cornwall catching them off guard and cornering them. The Pinkertons announced themselves just days before, not too far from where the gang was held up, in Horseshoe Overlook. They had no choice but to immediately pack up everything and relocate. The pressure of staying one step ahead of the hell that awaited them, and now being placed in a region where the climate is not only working against him, but then there's his lack of direction in the beginning, and then actively being utilized to be put against both the Braithwaites and the Gray family. He also got shot, beaten, tortured, burned down tobacco fields. I mean, this entire chapter alone by itself undoubtedly exacerbated his condition, even if his cough never reappeared throughout the entire chapter, which I don't think it does. You have to acknowledge the amazing storytelling by Rockstar to just put that small little cough at the beginning of a chapter that's rich with so much other stuff going on, actively attacking Arthur without you even realizing it, primarily the weather. Then there's the main point of this video, Dutch's hatred for Southerners. It too begins quite subtle, with him sharing his father died during the Civil War up in Pennsylvania, fighting the South. It comes off as a passing comment, treating us with some more information on Dutch's background. But as the chapter progresses, his true feelings begin to be put front and center. He absolutely revels in hiding in plain sight. He makes a mockery of coming up in the world as deputies in a land of hillbillies, drunkards, and slavers, where he says honest thieves like the Vanderlyn Gang are meant to be the moralizers here, the divine truth here in the South. He continues to laugh at how Bill looks in a badge serving his country again.
That badge rather suits you, Mr. W.
Yes, I thought so too.
Does it feel good to be back at it, serving your country?
I wouldn't go that far.
A jab at Bill's former military service, a jab at the law, and most importantly, a nod to the intellectual superiority he believes to have over the people of Lemoyne, something he says himself.
Finally.
You've always been a
Finally.
piece of crap. Come on, move.
We have a life on a land so stupid, a backwater so backwards that even we are like geniuses.
This is followed by his optimism on how Hosea can play the Braithwaites like a fiddle, and the gang can easily play the position between both families from all sides. Very little caution is practiced, and by the time Arthur and Hosea have already made themselves known with the Braithwaite family, at which point Arthur, Hosea, Bill, and Dutch have already ingratiated themselves with the Gray family, who over time were already dropping hints of being wary of who this bunch of strangely helpful Yankees are and what exactly they are after. As early as a mission or two into the chapter, where Arthur directly meets Beau Gray, he explains to Arthur that this part of the country rarely sees visitors, and now here's a whole lot of Yankees from the north that all of a sudden just want to be a part of the local region's politics, help with tax-dodging moonshiners out in the swamps just because it's the right thing to do. He shares he can pretty much see right through the facade. The gang is clearly looking for something, but luckily for them, Beau's priorities and real concerns lie with Penelope Braithwaite. Yes, his family's rich, and he doesn't care if they decide to kill a lot of them. He just wants to focus on her and their forbidden love. Considering Beau's written off as just a strange character, Arthur could have just seen him as someone who's uniquely perceptive, and not that big of a problem since he admits he cares little for his family or the supposed gold they're sitting on, rather just getting the hell out of here with Penelope Braithwaite. However, following Dutch's decision to rob both families blind, believing it could be done before either realized it was the gang who did it to them and not the other family, Dutch would send Javier, John, and Arthur to meet with Tavish Gray, who apparently had a line on some thoroughbred horses that he wanted stolen from Braithwaite Manor. During that interaction, Tavish himself lets a quite bit known on his family's growing suspicion. As Arthur's walking up to the stables, Tavish can be heard talking to John about how his fields are being attacked and his men are dying. Who exactly are these people? Referring to John and Javier here. When Arthur walks up to him and starts to speak to him, he shares that he met Tavish's son, the sheriff, which Tavish responds by just saying okay and doesn't bother correcting him, which he should, on account that Beau already enlightened Arthur sometime before that Beau was actually the son of Tavish, with Sheriff Lee Gray being his uncle, which in turn would have made the sheriff not Tavish's son like Arthur called him, but his brother. Or it could have been another slip of the Greys' own misinformation strategy and first genuine attempt to force the Vanderlyn gang to back off. The horses Tavish wants stolen from Braithwaite's, he claims to be worth $7,000. That turns out to be a giant lie. The trio only get a few hundred for them, a far cry from the guaranteed amount by Tavish. Arthur would recall the whole ordeal as them being played for fools. In hindsight, they were. But by way of mislabeling the family's members, they subtly betrayed the plans. You see, Beau had no reason to lie about being Tavish's son and Lee's nephew. In fact, he's the outcast. His forbidden love with Penelope Braithwaite brings shame upon the family name and has left him as the black sheep, so why lie? Meanwhile, if the plan to rob the Braithwaite's horses was a setup, then perhaps Arthur calling Sheriff Gray Tavish's son wasn't his mistake, at least not the one we think. Rather, it's the mistake of him not paying more attention to Beau. Beau shared his relation to Lee and Tavish well into the chapter's beginning. Yet before Arthur set out to meet with John and Javier at the Gray family estate, Dutch is the one that mentions it's Sheriff Gray that put in a good word with his father Tavish. It was a setup from the start. Tavish ranting about his fields being attacked and men dying and questioning John and Javier could have been his frustration with everything and irritation of having to bank on this plan bubbling to the surface, almost indirectly yet directly confronting the people that have been attacking his family. And it's not just the Greys' plans subtly peeking through here, but the Vanderlyn gangs as well. Arthur is also introduced here as Arthur Morgan, as opposed to the alias Arthur Callahan he gave Sheriff Gray and Deputy McGregor upon their meeting. Hell, he's been practically working under that alias, deputized by the sheriff himself. He also gave his real name to Catherine Braithwaite. So it's one thing to say they got too ambitious by trying to rob both families, which I think most people, including Arthur, thought was the wrong move, but even Arthur got too sloppy, giving different names and personally getting involved in both estates as opposed to just having one half of the gang fully take over one part of the operation, working exclusively with the Greys, while the other half ingratiated themselves with the Braithwaites, brainstorming some kind of idea for a good cover story as to why some fresh faces are helping both these families. They could have portrayed the Vanderlyn gang as a house divided, a former collective split by differing leadership, opposing views, different ways of doing things, now bitter rivals who want nothing more than to have the Greys or Braithwaites, and vice versa, rid the land of the other. Under cover of darkness or in the safety within the camp's boundaries, they regroup and share everything they learned and are planning. so they could truly be ahead of both families, properly working them. It's a plan that probably still could have worked had it not been watered down and completely dumbed down by Dutch's own perception of the locals, something that no doubt was blown up by Micah. Micah's right by Dutch's side when he reveals to Arthur their new plan to rob both families. As if showing his face in the name of reconnaissance wasn't bad enough, now he was helping in the full destruction of the two, something he was immediately against, which were feelings that he doubled down on when Dutch calls the plan as revenge for his daddy.
Well, how the hell did we get in at the Grays place?
Sheriff Gray kindly put in a word with his father. It ain't that complicated. We gotta convince each family that we're on their side, and then we rob them both. Before they figure out it was us that done it, and not the other lot, we'll be long gone. Think of it as payback for my daddy.
Payback. I ain't in the revenge business, Dutch. Least of all for something happened a long time ago.
Well,
It was a plan that Arthur doubted, built around a word Arthur was taught and raised on by Dutch to absolutely despise. And in continuing with it, despite the gang's sloppiness in their executions, a high reliability on absolutely nobody talking, which could be risky enough between the Grays and Braithwaites, but believing none of the Grays would talk amongst themselves is quite an oversight. Even if Dutch saw Sheriff Gray as a drunken moron, as he does seem to do here.
safe hands now. And people waste time with the temperance movement. Liquor never dulled a good man's senses.
It's awe-inspiring at just how dumb he really thought Southerners were, at least these inbreds, and for this, the gang would get a black eye for it. Sean was killed, set up in the town of Rhodes by the Grays, while the Braithwaites seized an opportunity to take a child from within the gang's own campgrounds. Instead of them being played and hit simultaneously, believing the other family did it to them, the Linde Gang was hit from both sides, played for fools, suffering two major blows in search of gold that never existed. Blood Feuds, Ancient and Modern, is the true destructive power of the Linde Gang on display, wiping out an entire family tree and estate in a matter of minutes, as retribution for the kidnapping of a young boy. But it's also Catherine Braithwaite's payment for playing Dutch for a fool, something Angelo Bronte would later learn. Dutch's anger in killing Angelo Bronte in the following chapter, Shady Belle, for playing Dutch for an idiot, is pivotal, setting him up to rob a trolley station that had not a single dollar within its cash register is often highlighted as Dutch's most brutal moment, one of the rawest examples of Dutch's revenge. Angelo Bronte would later be drowned and fed to an alligator for his transgression against the gang leader in a fit of rage that was so brutal that it left his most feared enforcers in shock from what they witnessed. Now, the concussion Dutch suffers from the trolley station robbery is often highlighted as the catalyst behind Dutch's outburst here, losing his usual sense of composure due to his head injury, that if he wasn't still suffering from, then had some permanent effects on his head and way of thinking and behaving. However, I believe his anger was because someone outsmarted him, thought they can play him, and when he needs to be the one that's always in charge and playing others, it's something he can't handle. Angelo Bronte is not an isolated example like a lot of us believed it to be. I think Catherine Braithwaite was the first one to suffer that anger and rage, which made all the more sense when these dumb inbreds, these drunk hillbillies, outsmarted him. How can people without two brain cells be smarter than the man that's supposed to be the one that has answers to everything? The one who needs to be in control, that's one step ahead of the law, that managed to get him and his men deputized and had this gold right at his fingertips, to only lose another man in the process and take a child from under his watch. Tavish Gray dangled gold in front of them, reminding the gang they had money. Sheriff Gray played the drunken fool, perhaps his usual demeanor, but as the curiosity of these helpful Yankees continued to grow, alongside the trouble both families appeared to be suffering from, he leaned more into it, playing a bigger idiot than usual to see if the gang would bite, and they did. Dutch's greed and hatred got the better of him here. His intellectual superiority was contagious, causing other members such as Arthur to interchange names and continue to drop their guard. If the gang ended up anywhere else that demanded much more respect from Dutch, things would have played out very differently, perhaps for the better. An entire region wouldn't have had its most prominent families wiped off the face of the earth with perhaps less casualties to the gang and less of a blow to their overall morale. In storming Braithwaite Manor, he made an example out of them. Every last one of her sons was killed, Her house burned down, all while hearing about the Braithwaite name is nothing more than a symbol of inbred hillbilly trash. Hillbilly trash that for a day or so at least outlived their bitter enemies, the Grays. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. If you're looking forward to some more Red Dead Redemption videos, particularly covering Arthur's specific evolution throughout the chapter of Clemens Point, consider subscribing as that video will be out quite soon, along with other major character analysis videos. I also want to take this opportunity to thank channel members. Aries823 is the only one, but I greatly appreciate it. It helps quite a lot. If you enjoy videos like this, have some suggestions on what to cover next, or want some priorities with videos, consider joining the memberships. Of course, it's not expected or required at all. It just helps me be a little more consistent in devoting much more time to videos, but it's the extra mile of supporting the channel. But like always, just watching is more than enough. Thank you again, and I'll see you all in the next video.